I know tonight's session is about social change, and just looking around the room, it's very obvious it's going to be led by women. That's maybe the first observation. But welcome to all of you. I hope you have a good evening. We've got a fantastic panel of speakers tonight, and it's my great pleasure to welcome the panel, and Jay's going to introduce the panel, but especially a privilege to welcome Jay back to the school. I think it's a critical topic at a critical time.
It's great to be back here. I'm always surprised that you ask an ex-trade union leader to come to a business school. Actually, there's no blueprint for what works and what doesn't work. We're in a period of tremendous change in the world. What does democracy mean? We fought for a democracy in this country. We have the most progressive constitution. I think the Kenyan one just overtook us. But we have all the institutional arrangements. We have separation of power. We have this written into constitutions. But today we have, extreme protests out there in the country, complaining that people have not been given what they have a right to. That violence is a language which we have to understand and understand what is driving them. So I think this is a whole new world, and fortunately we have a very talented group here to try and help us navigate this, because there is no blueprint out there. And so I'm not going to spend a long time on introductions. So Mark Heywood, you all know, today he runs Section 27, a new style post-democracy organization of civil society that understands some of the lessons of the past and some of the environment which has changed and how to navigate into the future. I'm going to turn to Mark, and say, when you talk about NGOs and civil society, what are we talking about? Because there's such a wide spectrum of organizations.
Civil society seems to be many different things to many different people. Lady Zamande calls us counter-revolutionaries, neoliberals, counter-majoritarians, funny terms like that, which we're not. But on the other hand, there is a problem for me with this notion of civil society, in the sense that civil society embraces everything from... It's beginning to happen. You asked me about what is the state of civil society today. It's a big question. When you went into government in 1994, there was quite a strong civil society that had been built up around the UDF and so on and so on. A lot of civil society went into government. There was a lot of expectation. There was a demobilization. There was a sort of trust that things were going to be delivered. Now it's clear that things will not just be delivered. You can't just trust that the government will give good healthcare services, will protect the environment. So there's a significant regrouping of civil society. I can list a range of organizations: Section 27, Equal Education, the Social Justice Coalition, Sonke Gender Justice, groups that are the Right to Know campaign, groups that are working around gender-based violence. Some parts are stronger, some parts are weaker. But what I do want to say, Jay, which is where I was trying to go, is that the quest for social justice is absolutely vital now to the stability of our democracy. Social justice is at the heart of our Constitution. And our Constitution is what instructs our conduct on a day-to-day basis in South Africa. So you have a society that's democratic, but it's not just. You can have a society that has human rights, but it's not just, because it doesn't spread human rights. We've chosen a society that talks about social justice, and that means equality in education, equality in health, and so on.
So Tracey Henry is the CEO of Sitululu Social Investments, and Tracey has a long and illustrious career going through the ranks of the corporate sector, but at one point decided, in fact, we have to see business playing a bigger role than just driving production or driving economic growth. And in fact, increasingly, business is becoming one of the biggest non-state actors on the global stage. Is it in the interest of business to understand development and to be concerned about the development? Those are questions that I'm going to ask Tracey to talk to. Because, how does business see the evolving situation in the country, in the continent, in Africa? How does it understand the sort of democracy we have and the interpretation, say, that comes from civil society about social justice being at the core. Is business worried?
I think we've moved into a situation where we all realize there's this wave of change, there's a lot of uncertainty, and when we talk about civil society or the NGO sector, just realizing that there's a crisis. So I'm not trying to, my perception is there is a crisis. Business cannot operate in isolation. It's part of a system, and your stakeholders demand a lot more from you in terms of accountability, in terms of community engagement. And there's a whole lot of factors that drive that, whether it's corporate governance, whether it's King 3, whether it's when you're working in the resource sector, and the fact that we have the highest Gini coefficient, and how do we address that? Looking at the National Development Plan, and how does business relate to that, and what role do they play, and how do they engage with their stakeholders, and particularly the NGO sector in fulfilling that, because ultimately business is hugely dependent on the non-profit sector.
Business puts 6 billion rand into corporate social responsibility. I mean, from what I've understood from Mark, they don't get 1 cent from business. And when I've spoken to my friends in business, they say, Section 27, no, we are a bit, you can't be seen to supporting an organization that may be seen to be in conflict with government. Do you experience that? How would you answer that? Because that's where I think that not even the traditional established business, but even the new business that has come out of a history of activism says the same thing.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, in the 1970s, even before that, thinking about Black Sash, organizations like that played a critical role in our society then, and were supported by business. It might have been, fairly low-key. I think that where we're currently at as a society, I think business might be anxious and nervous about supporting initiatives that do tend to raise issues.
People are nervous about Section 27. Is there any reason why they should be nervous? I mean, if you're looking to corporates to say, well, how do you make it, possible for a corporate to feel that it is giving money for you to fund a campaign for the right of people they eventually need in their companies to have quality education, to have textbooks? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things. First of all, I think business doesn't actually fully understand the social justice sector or the rationales that underlie social justice work. And I think that it would be good for business to interact and understand that these things are not demons. They're not so-called anti-government organizations. They're not organizations that have a political agenda. I think that's a necessary first step for government. Tracey, I'll just give you an example. I mean, you've seen there have been points in our history where we're in fierce conflict with government. But what's less known is that there are other points in history where we collaborate very, very closely with government. I mean, I was joking with somebody just now. A few days ago I saw the Department of Basic Education starting to retweet Section 27 tweets. I thought, oh, well, because something's happening here. For Christmas, by the way, Section 27, the Treatment Action Campaign, ran the medicines depot in Umtata in the Eastern Cape. If business just doesn't throw its weight behind the Constitution bravely, not in an antagonistic, anti-government way, then the environment is going to become very anti-business, as we're seeing, for example, with the inability to resolve the issues that are taking place at Marikana at the moment and so on. The last thing I say, Jay, just on this though, which is why I think it makes me very sad, is that we don't invest in our own democracy. My organisation is 98% funded by foreign organisations. And that's a problem.
That's why you're seen as a counter-revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe this is where I want to ask Danny, because Danny looks at it from a global perspective. And the one thing, Danny, I think that you can talk to, what's happening in this country is not unique. Danny is recently appointed as the Secretary General of Civicus. It's a global civil society movement, mainly southern-based of national networks. And Danny, also originally born in Sri Lanka, a country that you understand had violent conflict for a long time, had to leave as a young person, and then travel across 5 continents. So he's worked in different situations and run different institutions, and he's just relocated his family, including his wife, who's Ghanaian, Jamaican, and their 2-month-old son, who's come with their 2 other kids to South Africa. So this gives us a sense of the flavor of the issues that are confronting you as a sector.
Okay, thank you. I think there are some serious issues and serious challenges. I started this job 4 months ago, and I naively thought that we'd won the argument that a robust and independent civil society was a fundamental part of democracy, and that every leader in the world believed that, and that we're going to just move on. But as you say, South Africa is not unique in the challenges that it faces, because wherever we look around the world, and we're a global organisation with members and partners in 100 countries, things are looking pretty dire. There are countries in which there are some, civil society activists are being killed in Central and Eastern Europe, trade unionists are being murdered in Latin America. This is 2013. In Russia, we have the government insisting that if you receive any money from overseas, you have to register as a foreign agent, which I'm told is in Russia is the same word as spy. Is now, we're starting to see slowly but surely states encroaching on the ability of people to mobilize online. So there's, it's easier than ever before for a state to monitor what's going on, because people write stuff, it's being held in servers, it's easy to surveil this material. So in many parts of the world, in many different ways, civil society is under threat. Actually, I think in the next few years, we're going to come up with far more effective ways of citizens themselves reporting or generating the sorts of information, data, views, news, whatever else it is, that's going to allow us to hold governments to account. Not just at the national level. So I think, Mark's point about, in South Africa, I hope we can start to develop much more sophisticated, thicker ways in which every citizen can hold governments to account at every level in real time, not just at the ballot box every few years. Which is that we've probably had, if you look globally at civil society, I'm going to make a sort of broad generalization here, we've had about 30-40 years of increasing professionalization of the sector, driven by lots of different forces that have come together. One is donor requirements. So people, whether it's trusts and foundations or governmental donors, have required civil society organisations to report, and which has not been a bad thing, because as Mark says, that means civil society can demonstrate what we've been able to achieve. But also, it's the way that the state has tried to relate to civil society.
There was a pretty old generation here in this room, and I sort of reflect on the times where we were active. And we had no rich donor. There were those chickalulus sitting there wanting to give us money. There wasn't a Gates Foundation around that thought that this was a good idea. We didn't even have a business plan. We didn't decide we were going to measure how we will struggle. We just said there are things that are just and there are things that aren't just. There are things that are taking my human dignity away, and I'm going to stand up. And the first thing we had to do, which is, I had the good fortune of listening to Steve Biko speak, he helped me liberate my mind. Because I knew that my destiny was in my hands. No one else could free me until I freed myself. So it starts off with us as an individual. And the question is, what is your role as an individual citizen? And it starts in your home. It starts in the work that you are doing. It starts if you're a teacher. There was a pretty old generation here in this room. And I sort of